Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all participants and all invited speakers. Welcome to International Webinar, Financial Crime, Fraud, and Cybersecurity, hosted by Universitas 11 Maret in collaboration with the Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia. My name is Joshua Christian, and I will be your moderator for this webinar. So yeah, once again, welcome to this international webinar. Based on the information I received from the committee, I think this is a very huge webinar because for your information, we have more than 5,000 registered participants who wants to join this international webinar. So congratulations for the committee. And we provide 3 channels to all participants to reach and join this international webinar. First, you can join with us through Zoom Cloud meetings. We have shared the link so you can join with us through Zoom Cloud meetings. But if you are not able to join our Zoom Cloud meeting because we have the maximum capacity, you can reach us through Universitas 11 Maret YouTube channel. So make sure that you subscribe Universitas 11 Maret YouTube channel so you can join with us through YouTube. And also it has been broadcasted live in Center for Fintech and Banking, Universitas 11 Maret Instagram Live. So make sure that you follow at uns.fintech center so you can join also through Instagram Live. Yeah, and this webinar we talks about financial crime, fraud, and cybersecurity, the 3 main issues that becomes the concern in this digital era. As we know that digital age automation has developed tremendously, and it brings the effective and efficient way in integrating system, business and transaction process, developing all sectors and industries, and also human life. But on the other side, we also realized that it raised one issue pertaining to the risk of fraud and crime and how to mitigate the risk. So we will discuss about that. We have all invited speakers. They have joined with us. So let me say hi to all of them one by one, okay? Okay, let's start with Dr. Agung Firman Sampurna, CSFA, the chairman of the Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia. Hello, Dr. Agung.
Hi, everyone.
How are you? How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Thank you for joining with us. Professor Piwoho, Director of Universitas 11 Maret. Professor Jamal, how are you?
Hello, good evening, fine.
Thank you. Professor Stuart Metnick from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, USA. Wow. Thank you so much for joining with us, Prof.
Thank you.
Professor John Goodell from University of Akron, USA. I will say hi.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for allowing me to join you. It's such a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Dr. Dominic Thomas James from University of Cambridge, UK and Yale University Global Justice Program, USA. Hi, Dr. Dominic.
Good evening to everyone. Excellent to be with you
It's
today.
nice to see you. Thank you. Professor Marian Younger from University of Twente, Netherlands. Hi, Prof. Younger.
Yes.
Is it correct? Professor Younger, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining with us. Dr. David Chaikin from University of Sydney, Australia. Hi, Dr. David.
Hi, and thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting seminar. It really says something that you're organizing it in more than 3 time zones. It's quite an achievement.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. David, for joining with us. Dr. Muhammad Iqbal Aruzi from the Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia. Halo.
Hai, halo, Mr.
Okay, so I can say in bahasa. Apa kabar, Pak?
Baik, alhamdulillah. Terima kasih.
Okay, it's nice to see you. And Dr. Taufik Arifin from Universitas 11 Maret.
Hi, thank you for this opportunity, Joshua.
Okay, thank you, my lecturer. Thank you for joining this webinar.
Yeah.
There is one also, Dr. Richard Alexander, but He will join with us after 9 p.m. because he still have any agenda. So yeah, thank you so much for all speakers. It's been our honor to have all of you here to share your knowledge, to share your insight pertaining to these topics. So moving to the next agenda, I would like to invite the Rector of Universitas 11 Maret, Professor Jamal Wiwoho, to give the opening remarks for this webinar.
Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening, Excellencies Dr. Agung Firman Sampurna, Chairman of the Supreme Audit Board of the Republik Indonesia, BPK. Selamat malam, Pak Agung Firman Sampurna.
Selamat malam, Pak Rektor.
Selamat malam. Terima kasih. Respectable all speaker in this webinar, Professor Stuart Medix from MIT, USA. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Okay. Professor John Goodell from University of Akron, United States of America. Good morning. Professor Mariana Janger from University of Twente, Netherlands. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. Dr. Dominic Thomas James, University UK. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you. Excellent to see you.
Oh, thank you. Dr. Richard Alexander from SOAS University of London, UK. Good afternoon. Dr. David Chaikin from University of Sydney, Australia. Dr. Baharun Abdul Hamid from Malaysia. Selamat malam.
Selamat malam, Pak.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Muhammad Iqbal Aruzi from BPK RI. Selamat malam, Pak Iqbal.
Selamat malam Bapak, terima kasih.
Thank you for your coming. And Dr. Taufik Arifin from 11 Maret University. Sugeng Dalu, Pak Arifin.
Sugeng Dalu, Prof. Jamal.
Matur nuwun rawuhnya.
Ji, sami-sami.
First of all, on behalf of 11 Maret University, it is great pleasure for us to welcome you to the big event, the international webinar on financial crime, fraud, and cyber security. As we have witnessed, technology has rapidly impacted in many aspects, including in financial service. However, what the digitalization and automation of financial system, the threat of financial crime and fraud, including money laundering, have become more electronically sophisticated. Therefore, this webinar, in which more than 5,000 participants registered and dedicated to providing a forum to discuss the financial crime and fraud in the digitization and how to prevent and detect it. In this question, we fortunately have Dr. Agung Firman Sampurna, the Chairman of Supreme Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia, as the keynote speaker and many well-known international speaker. Our university has committed to contribute in the sustainable development, not only at the national level, but also in the regional and international environment as we are fully aware that in today's globalized world, contribution of university should be promoted to a wider spectrum. Finally, let me reiterate that we strongly expect that this forum will be beneficial from you all and gain. We thank you very much for participating in the international webinar. Good evening. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Professor Jamal, and I believe this will be beneficial to all of us. And before we proceed to the next agenda, I would like to say hi to Dr. Baharom. I have not said hi to you, Dr. Baharom. Hi, Dr. Baharom.
Yeah, Assalamualaikum Yoshia. Hi.
Thank you so much for joining with us from Malaysia, our neighbor. Thank you. Yeah, moving to the next agenda, I would like to invite the chairman of the Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia, who will deliver the keynote speech for this webinar, to Dr. Agung Firman Sampurna, CSFA. The time is yours.
Yeah, honestly, I never thought the participant of this activity would be so enthusiastic. Thank you, moderator. The respectable rector of 11 Maret University, Professor Dr. Jamal Wiwoho. I would like to greet all the panelists across the globe. Professor Stuart Matnick from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, USA. Professor John Goodell from University of Akron, USA. Dr. Dominic Thomas James from University of Cambridge, United Kingdom, and fellow at the Yale University, USA. Professor Mariana Junger from University of Twente, Netherlands. Dr. Baharum Abdul Hamid from International Center for Education in Islamic Finance, Malaysia. Dr. David Chaikin from University of Sydney Business School, Australia. Dr. Richard Alexander from University of London School of Oriental and African Studies. And of course, Dr. Muhammad Iqbal Aruzi from the Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia, and Taufik Arifin from 11 Maret University of Indonesia. All lecturers, students, and webinar participants all over the places. Let me start by saying Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Peace be upon you all. Ladies and gentlemen, in the past 20 years, financial crime in the banking and capital market and insurance sector has increased in terms of intensity, quantity, and quality. It does happen not only in Indonesia, but also in other parts of the world. In Indonesia, financial crime began to draw public attention when the Bank of Indonesia Liquidity Assistance, popularly known as BLBI case, and Bank Bali scandal emerged. Bank Bali at the time committed fake transfer of account receivable or chassis. The scandal was revealed through an investigative audit process that was quite complicated because it involved the layering process in flowing funds. Such a process was successfully disclosed by way of using information technology so that all patterns contained in thousands of financial transactions were clearly seen through a sunburst diagram. After the Bank Bali scandal, so many different kinds of banking crime have emerged, including one related to the provisions of the short-term funding facilities FPJP to Century Bank. The provisions of FPJP apparently also had a systemic impact to result in distributions of temporary equity participations by deposit insurance corporations, or LPS. Similarly, in early 2020, this year, there was a financial crime that has really drew public attention, the scandals of Jiwasraya Insurance Company and Bumiputra. The Jiwasraya Insurance case was the first time scandal taking place in the capital market and in the field of insurance. Both the quality and quantity of this case are increasing. The state losses and the impact on other institutions were huge, not only companies related to Jiwasraya that were affected, but also the Financial Service Authority. This such case have proven empirically that disclosure requires unusual examination procedures through an investigative audit assignment. Considering that the chronology of this case illustrates an increased terms of intensity, quantity, and quality, strengthening the investigation audit and the role of forensic auditor is very important. Therefore, I am enthusiastic to welcome the initiative and the urgency of international webinar on financial crime, fraud, and cybersecurity organized by 11 Maret University that also involves some experts from different continents. This topic is very current and relevant for all of us in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic crisis that hit Indonesia and the rest of the world with its impact on stability of country financial sector and financial systems. Reflecting on past experience, the economic and financial crisis always lead various legal issues in the future, and at the same time, so the role of investigative audit is of paramount importance in uncovering these problems. This international webinar activity is at the same time our collective effort as a form of an early warning system for perpetrators of fraud and financial crimes, and for all of us to improve the quality of accountants and forensic auditors in preventing and detecting fraud and financial crime that is increasingly more complex and varied in line with the advancement of cyber and digital technology. Ladies and gentlemen, in accordance with the Act number 15 of 2004 of the Audit of Management and Responsibility of State Finance and the Act of number 15 of 2006 on the Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia, or popularly known nationwide as BPK, conduct three types of audit, namely financial audit, performance audit, and the audit with specific purposes. Investigative examinations is one form of audit with specific purposes. In some literatures, investigative audit is interpreted as an audit initiative that is closely related to the alleged fraud. Both fraud in company operation and fraud in company financial system, financial statement. Investigative audit is a form of audit where the end result is conclusion whether a fraud actually occurred or not. The investigative activity is one of the efforts to prove the occurrence of crime, as the end result is the conclusions of alleged fraud. An investigative audit can only begin if the predications is strongly well-formed. Predication is storyboard on all events that directly or indirectly lead to conclusion that a fraud has really occurred or is happening or will occur, as mentioned in Tuana Kota 2016. This predication is very helpful for the auditor to design the 5 W and H questions and other relevant questions to reach the conclusions of the investigative audit result. The result of this investigative audit become a legal evidence that can be generally proceeded to court using the applicable legal provisions. It is a such close distance of the investigative process to the legal verification process that an investigative audit involves not only fraud testing or fraud examiners, but also some forensic expertise, especially forensic audit and digital forensic. This forensic expertise is a must in every single investigative audit as a tool to anticipate the possibility of emerging dispute or litigations. Referring to statement on standard of forensic services number 1 issued by AICPA, or American Institute of certified public accountants, forensic is defined as fit for use in court hearing and public debate. Through this forensic process, an investigative audit can be concluded whether a fraud has actually occurred or is happening or just will occur. By the conclusions of alleged fraud, the investigative audit has a clear position in detections and preventions of fraud. In the investigation audit process, an evidence is very indispensable to prove the occurrence of a fraud. In the last 10 years, in the era of so-called as the Industrial Revolution 4.0, there has been a shift in the form of evidence. In 2001, the United States of America issued the USA Patriot Act, which allowed federal agents to obtain records of company transactions for the sake of state security. The law also facilitated information sharing initiative among government institutions so that it built a comprehensive information network or a better connected to the dot, as mentioned in Department of Justice 2001. In Indonesia, this development was marked by the issuance of the Act number 11 of 2008 on the information in electronic transactions, within which electronic information and or electronic document can become one of the legal proofs of law. Thus, today it is not only statement or witnesses, experts, defendants, or letters and instructions that can be legal evidence as stated in the Code of Criminal Procedures, but also electronic and digital evidence as stated in the 2008 Electronic Information and Transaction Act. The advancements of information technology not only encourage the enrichment of evidence and legal evidence, but also triggers the development of audit techniques to detect and prevent fraud. Current investigative audit techniques are not enough just to test documents, physical instructions, or witness statements. Investigative audit must be able to utilize information technology to improve the ability to detect and prevent fraud. The development of information technology in investigative audit at this time can be directed to strengthen two processes, which are the main tools related to the analysis of digital evidence and electronic evidence, namely the digital forensic and data analytics processes. Ladies and gentlemen, the rapid technology of information technology has a positive impact on the increasing use of technology in daily activities. Not only to increase the value of companies, technology is also used by fraudsters to facilitate their fraudulent activity. The consequences of crime of using technology is the increasing amount of digital evidence that must be tested and researched by law enforcement agencies around the world, including investigative auditors. Ultimately, the need for the adoption of digital forensic practices will greatly increase in the future. As the only institution with the authority to conduct audit on the management and responsibility of state finance, the Board of Audit of Republik Indonesia, or BPK, undoubtedly needs the most updated digital forensic facilities. BPK is not super body institution though. However, to implement the entire digital forensic process, BPK always collaborates with all law enforcement agencies, such as the police, Attorney General Office, and Corruption Eradication Commission. The implementation of digital forensic is always conducted in every investigation audit assignment. This is one of BPK responsibility, particularly in conducting audit with specific purpose. To attain the qualified result of digital forensic, BPK has now owned digital forensic laboratory facilities. The existence of these facilities is able to reduce the level of dependence of the investigation team on the third parties. BPK Digital Forensic Laboratory has been equipped with several devices and hardware for conducting interrogations of electronic devices. Electronic devices that can be analyzed for data are not only storage media available on computer laptop that can also analyze data stored on a mobile phone. In 5 or 10 years to come, the challenge in applying digital forensics are increasing in both quantity and quality. In the early 2000s, analyzing data and information stored on computer hard disks was common in investigative audit. In the early 2010s, the compilations of technology owned by telephone device had capabilities similar to computers. Digital forensic activities began to more widely apply to storage media connected to mobile phones. In the early 2020s, along with the maturity level of cloud computing service providers, more and more companies are storing their data on these services. Coupled with the increasingly widespread use of Internet of Things, or IoT, for phase data transmission from device to data centers, the challenge of digital forensics in the future will be increasingly complex in cloud services. User will not know the physical locations of the data storage media. This condition encourages the digital forensic specialists to continually update their expertise. From some experience in conducting digital forensic, there is concept that must be obeyed by investigators when interrogating electronic device, including the storage media available therein. The concept is called chain of custody. Chain of custody is a factor that determines the work of digital forensic feasible enough to be given in court. Chain of custody is a set of integrated and complete information about time, locations, and personnel for the evaluations of digital evidence moving from acquisition of computing devices, storage media acquisition, data collection analysis, up to the result report. The importance of chains of custody in the process of digital forensic can be seen in a number of cases in court. In 1990, for example, in the case of O.J. Simpson, there was a negligence in securing the entirety of chains of custody of evidence found at the scene. As a result, the prosecutor were unable to present reliable evidence. The incomplete chains of custody convinced the judge to decide the defendant innocence. In Indonesia, in 2016, there was a case that caught public attention, such as Vietnam coffee case. Jessica Kumala Wongso was charged to be responsible for the death of Wayan Mirna Salihin. In this case, the public prosecutor invited a digital forensic expert. From the trial record, which were all broadcast live to the public through YouTube channels, there is one testimony showing an incomplete chain of custody in managing evidence of CCTV recording taken from the scene. The two examples above are the cases of general crime. However, the same thing is also applicable for digital forensic use in any fraud case and other financial crimes. In addition to the chain of custody, there are other referenced frequent use by investigators in implementing digital forensics, such as 4 principles of handling digital evidence issued by Association of Chief Police Officers, or ACPO, as I mentioned in ACPO 2012. The 4 principles are: first, there must be no activity by law enforcement agencies, law enforcement officials, or assignees that make changes to the data to be used in court. Second, when a situation requires a personnel to access information containing digital evidence, that person must have sufficient competence and have the ability to explain matters relating to his or her actions. Third, all activity that are applied to the digital evidence must be recorded so that the third-party re-performance process can be carried out and provide the same result. And fourth, the party carrying out this investigation has full responsibility for ensuring that all actions are in accordance with applicable regulations and these principles. BPK practice of digital forensic result in evidentiary process in court is still minimal. The result of digital forensic process in BPK are still in exploratory analytic areas. This suggests a direction for inspection procedures to lead to confirmatory. For example, BPK has software to support digital forensic activity in the form of NCASE or NUICs, which are used to check digital evidence stored in storage media. Both software can produce some information and also the patterns of series of electronic communication stored in the storage media through data exploratory analysis. This information is useful for other investigators as material for conducting interviews or exploring the further information obtained from the result of the digital forensic in confirmatory analysis procedure. Another important thing of implementing digital forensic is issues of objectivity and integrity. Both are uneasily influenced by other information irrelevant to predetermined predications. For example, if an investigative audit is intended to prove that there is a crime in financial sector and must carry out the digital forensic process, then each party carrying out the process must prioritize the matter expected from the assignment. If within the activity there is some other information which has nothing to do with predetermined predications, such finding pornographic videos or finding illegal software when checking hard disks, then the information as such must be ignored and should not be disclosed, as I mentioned in Kafrestat 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, the direction of developing information technology to strengthen the investigative audit function in detecting and preventing the financial crime is toward the enhancement of data analytic superstructures and infrastructures. Some practitioners believe that data analytics is just the same as computer-aided audit technique or CAATS. But AICPA distinguishes the two processes. Data analytics involves a broader process than CAATS. The latter is designed as a part of audit procedures, while the former is done to generate some information for the basic of the preparation of inspection procedures, as I mentioned in AICPA 2017. The concept of data analytics is getting popular in line with the development of big data. The existence of big data has then created some opportunity to use the big data. Therefore, the use of traditional software, such as spreadsheet or generalized audit software, become irrelevant because of the large amount and variety of data. AICPA defines data analytics as a science in uncovering and analyzing patterns stored in a set of data, identifying irregularities, and exploring other information that may be useful and relevant to purpose of inspection through process of collecting, cleaning, analyzing, modeling, visualizing data, both in the planning stage as well as the inspection. The main purpose of data analytics is to improve the quality of checks in response to business environment that has broadly used information technology. The ability of data analytics to reveal or identify a pattern contained in diverse data set is very helpful for investigative audit activities in revealing fraud or other financial crimes that have a hidden nature as I mentioned in Tuana Kota 2016. The process of data analytics is mostly implemented in two stages, exploratory and confirmative. In the exploratory stage, data analytics functions to obtain patterns and attributes contained in a set of data. After going through a series of validation and accuracy process, the data will be delivered to other investigators to go further into confirmation stage. At this stage, the information is applied to the inspection procedures. Several studies have concluded that there are three analytical models that can be generated from the data analytic process, primarily in the examination, as I mentioned in Intosai 2019. The three models are descriptive analytics, diagnostic analytics, and predictive analytics. By descriptive analytics, auditors are able to present a general picture of data set. An example of using descriptive analytics in an audit is when the auditor can find expenditure patterns of government capital in every fourth quarter. Usually, the amount of capital expenditure sharply rises up. By descriptive analytics too, the auditor can create a narrative profile of the audit entity using the data. By diagnostic analytics, the auditor can identify the existence of anomalies in a set of data. Then he or she conducts an analysis of the relationship between one data with another data and be able to see a pattern in the data set. An example of using diagnostic analytics in auditing is when the auditor is able to identify suspected bid rigging during a procurement process of goods and services. When a pattern of vendor participation is seen in government or procurement actions. The following are examples of data visualization that are often found as a result of descriptive or diagnostic analytics. Predictive analytics over the auditor to be able to predict what will happen in the future based on all data he or she has. For example, having the ability to conduct predictive analytics, an auditor can predict what procedures to perform with. In addition, he or she can also prevent and anticipate the fraud in financial statements by way of calculating projected misstatement in determining whether an audit sample can be accepted or should be rejected, as I mentioned, International Accounting Standard Board 2009. If the predictive analytics is continuously developed, it will help institutions in creating machine learning infrastructures. This continuous development will then make the concept of robotic process automation, or RPA, a reliable tool for any institution to rely on, especially for those whose fields cover big data and highly dependent on availability of the data, as I mentioned in Moffitt et al. 2018. As an institution that routinely conduct audit of financial report at the central and regional government level, BPK has significant opportunity to develop information technology up to that point. That following figures is the process that occurred in data analytics referring to Intosai data analytics guidelines, as I mentioned in Intosai 2019. The investigative audit can be done together with law enforcement agencies. Thus, it is possible to implement this data analytics with various data sources. Data analytics will make investigative audit more efficient and the quality of audit results will be well maintained. Ladies and gentlemen, for the development of information technology to provide optimal benefit for investigative audit in an effort to detect and prevent financial crimes, digital forensic and data analytics practice must be synergized, and each does not stand alone. The result of digital forensic process can be presented as input to the data analytic process. With this simple scenario, the existence of data analytics will enrich the procedures of investigative audit with relevant information, but without being monitored through the digital forensic process. The synergized capacity of digital forensic and data analytics is a strong foundation to form what is called corporate intelligence. Corporate intelligence is defined as the ability of an institution to analyze data obtained due to its authority or obtained from public domain for decision-making process, for decision-making purpose. Although some practitioners assume that corporate intelligence is the same as business intelligence, there are differences between the two. The scope of data used to build corporate intelligence is much broader than that used to build business intelligence, as mentioned in Scala et al. 2011. Corporate intelligence uses a lot of data that is spread in public domain. The availability of corporate intelligence in financial institutions will certainly increase the role of investigative audit in it to not only detect financial crime, but also prevent them. Being aware of the importance of synergies between the two areas in the development of information technology to strengthen investigative audit, BPK has taken the initiative to build big data analytic infrastructures. The initiative has been listed as one of the strategic initiatives in the BPK 2020-2024 strategic plan supporting the vision of BPK towards become the trusted audit institution that play an active role in building quality and beneficial state financial management to achieve the country goals. Before ending my keynote speech, I would like to remind you that challenge and risk in digital cyber world will be increasing in the years to come. According to the Global Risk Report 2020, published by the World Economic Forum, global risk, technological risks are included in top 10 global risks that need attention. Specifically, the technology risk is the form of data fraud, cyber attacks, and infrastructure breakdown. Finally, congratulations on joining the international webinar. Hopefully this activity can run smoothly and provide optimal results in accordance with the objective. That is for various information about latest development in field of financial crime, fraud, and cybersecurity in the digital world era. I do hope that this international webinar can also produce a series of brainstorming suggestions as a form of joint effort to prevent and detect various financial crimes and fraud through increased cybersecurity and the role of forensic accountants and auditors. Thus, we all take an active role in each other across country in building world with better governance. Thank you for your kind attention. Billahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Dr. Agung Firman Sampurna, for the keynote speech. Yeah, he stressed on the role of investigator in the future as the important role in terms of the development of the technology and information. And of course, the audit board needs to improve and adjust with the development of information and technology, like what the Audit Board of Republic of Indonesia has done, the Digital Forensic Laboratorium. So congratulations to the Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia for the achievement and transformation. So thank you so much, Dr. Agung Firman Sampurna, the chairman of the Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia. So let's move to the next agenda. We arrive in the plenary session for this webinar. We have 9 invited speakers that has joined with us to share their insights and perspective about the topic of this international webinar. But before we start to the first speaker, I would like to remind to all participants that you can participate in this international webinar. If you have questions, do not hesitate to let us know. You can submit your questions. If you are connected with us through Zoom cloud meetings, you can submit your questions with the format name, your institutions, to whom your question is addressed to, and your questions. You can submit it through Zoom chat box. And if you are connected with us through YouTube channel, Universitas 11 Maret YouTube channel, you can submit your question with the same format through live chat. And the same with all participants who connect with us through Instagram Live of Center for Fintech and Banking, Universitas 11 Maret. Our committee will select the questions, and I will read those questions in the Q&A session after all presenters present the materials. Okay, the information for you to submit the question will appear in your display, so you can follow that rule. Thank you so much. So now we are going to our first speaker. I would like to introduce our first speaker. He is a professor of information technology at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, USA, and also the founding director of cybersecurity at MIT Sloan. He holds a PhD in computer science from MIT and has been an MIT faculty member since, 1972. Wow. Besides cybersecurity, his other research interests include big data, semantic connectivity, database technology, and software project. So without further ado, hello, Professor Stuart Matnick.
Welcome from Cambridge, Massachusetts, halfway around the other side of the world. It's great to meet so many of you today. Unfortunately, it's only virtually, but I'd like to talk to you today about what I say every manager should know about cybersecurity, and also relate it back to the theme of financial crime and fraud. Get this slide to advance. There we go. So I assume that there's probably a wide range of backgrounds of the various people participating. So I want to say a few things that many of you may know, but many of you may not know, so they were all on the same level. So I said managers. So the question is, why should managers care about cybersecurity? Let me give you just one example. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of the WannaCry cyber attack that took place about 2 years ago. It was an example of ransomware. Now, for those who are not familiar with ransomware, it's actually somewhat different than the typical cyber attack where information is stolen. In this case, the information is not stolen off your computer. What happens is the information is scrambled. It's cryptographically encoded. So the information is still on your computer. You just can't make use of it until you pay a reward, a ransom, if you will, in which case then you're given the code to release it. Now, I was in my office this day when the WannaCry attack took place, and one of my students rushed in. It turns out he had previously worked for Telefonica, a major telephone company in Spain. And he was sent this screenshot that you see on the left-hand side. Unfortunately, I don't read Spanish, but he translated it as urgent, turn off your laptop immediately. It turns out that 80% of all of the computers at Telefonica were attacked by the ransomware and were locked up. Basically, they could not conduct any business, and all of the employees were then sent home. That is an impact that probably will have an impact on most managers when you have to shut your company down. This particular attack hit 300,000 computers in over 100 countries in a matter of hours. So there are these examples of attacks that have a major impact on your organization. There are many others we can talk about if we had more time. One that might be relevant to this group was the attack that took place via the SWIFT network that ended up stealing approximately $81 million. And in fact, was an effort that could have, if successful, have stolen over $1 billion US. And although we're going to be focusing on financial issues, it's not just money that's at stake. There can be attacks that affect your life or your property, such as the Turkish pipeline explosion, the German steel mill attack, the shutdown of the Ukrainian power grid, and many attacks aimed at the United States power grid. Now, this is not news to many of you. And the question you might ask yourself, with all of this activity going on, obviously the universities, the government, the private sector must be doing things to produce better software and better hardware. So I've got some good news. As this chart kind of indicates, the good guys are indeed getting better. Better technologies, better methods. Unfortunately, the bad news is that the bad guys are getting badder even faster. And in fact, this gap is growing. As this headline indicated, hackers are getting better at offense and companies are not getting better at defense. So you might be curious, well, how can that be true? There are many reasons, but it turns out in many ways, the bad guys do a much better job of information sharing than the good guys do, which is an important issue we all have to address. But not only that, there is the assumption that you have to be a super techie hacker in order to do these kinds of events, and that's no longer true. Most of, I call it the weapons for a cyber attack, are readily available for sale on the dark web. In fact, many of the weapons used in the WannaCry attack were in fact software that had been developed at great expense by the United States National Science Authority that had then been stolen and was then available for resale at a fraction of the cost on the dark web. So in many ways, you can buy everything you need to know in order to do a cyber attack. Now, for many of you, or many people I talk to in the public, have heard of cyber attacks and cybersecurity, and the immediate assumption is, well, that's a very technical issue, and shouldn't that be something addressed by the IT folks? Well, of course, there's a lot of work, as I said, going on in industry and in research, focusing on ways to improve the hardware and software. And that's all very helpful. But in fact, it turns out that a majority of cyber attacks, estimates range from 70 to 80%, some people estimate 90%, are aided or abetted by insiders, usually unintentionally. And that's why I say it's so important to address the managerial, organizational, and strategic aspects of cybersecurity, which are the role of us managers. And that's why I think this is very important for all of us. Now, let me give you an example, getting closer to the issues regarding fraud and such that were mentioned at the beginning. There was a great report that came out by the Gardner Group. They're a consulting firm, and had the title, Prevention is Futile. I don't know how many of you may be familiar with a science fiction television show called Star Trek. On that show, there are the evil forces known as the Borg, and whenever they're going to attack, they always say, resistance is futile. And they kind of picked up on that theme here. The argument is you can put all kinds of hardware and software techniques. I often say you can put a stronger lock on your door, but if you still leave the key under the mat, you're not necessarily any more secure. And the good example is phishing attacks. Now, many of you may have heard about them. Possibly many of you have been exposed to them. The early phishing attacks, I call them mass spam emails, typically say things like, hello, I have inherited $100 million. I want to share my good fortune with you. I want to give you $1 million. All you have to do is send me the following information. These sound kind of ridiculous, but it turns out 1 to 3% of people actually do fall for them. And of course, there are better phishing attacks. The most common one nowadays is an email you may be getting what appears to be the IT group in your company that will say things like, we believe we're under a cyber attack. We need your help. Please do the following things. There's usually a very nice looking message, has the logo of your company on it. And these attacks can often get anywhere from 10 to 18%. But the thing I want to spend a few minutes on are spear phishing. I'm not sure if that's a term that all of you have heard of, but these are very successful. The idea behind spear phishing is a very targeted email. The classic example would be an email message apparently sent from the chief executive officer of your company to the chief financial officer of your company, typically saying something like this: "Hey, Fred, we're engaged in acquiring a company in Indonesia. It's a big deal, but you need to keep it very secret. But we've retained a law firm, and we need to send them $100,000 retainer immediately, because this is a very active transaction, and others may try to beat us to it. So please be sure to send out that money immediately today. Oh, and by the way, I can't be reached today. I'm going to be attending a webinar about cybersecurity in Indonesia today." Now, you may be a little cautious. You call your executive's office, talk to his assistant, who said, "I'm sorry, you can't get him today. He, in fact, is talking or involved in a webinar in Indonesia today." Now, what do? This is a multi-million-dollar deal. Your boss has told you to send money. And he obviously started his message off very friendly, say, "By the way, Fred, it was great to get together with your wife for dinner last week. Let's do that again." So it looks like a very convincing email. What do? In most cases, 70% of the time, people send it. There have been examples of hitting the United States White House, Barclays Bank, organizations around the world at the top levels. These are very successful types of frauds, if you will. Now, I've gone through this kind of quickly, and many of these things may be things you're familiar with. There are many others we have that you might be interested in. But the obvious question is, of course, what can be done about this? So I'm going to talk to you a little bit briefly about what we're doing in my organization at MIT. We formed a group called the Interdisciplinary Consortium for Improving Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity. That is a mouthful. And we've recently renamed it Cybersecurity at MIT Sloan. A little bit easier to say, has the initials CAMS. And I welcome you to visit our website to learn more about it. Currently, we have about 25 projects going on. As I mentioned, we're focused on the managerial, organizational, and strategic aspects of cybersecurity. I wanted to just take time to just briefly mention one of those projects. It actually does relate a little bit to the issue of digital forensics we just heard about a minute ago. The idea behind this project we called cyber safety. The idea was there's been a significant amount of research done at many places, including at my university, to try to reduce industrial accidents and improve safety. And our question was, to what extent can we use this research developed to improve safety to improve cybersecurity? And we call this effort cyber safety. And we've used it to analyze many attacks like Stuxnet and Capital One and Equifax, as well as to prevent various kinds of attacks going on into the future. So let me tell you a little bit what cyber safety is all about, how it works. There are three key concepts. The first concept is that it works top down. That is, focuses on what it is that you need to protect or prevent. I use an analogy. Possibly at my university, there may be 10,000 doors. And it would be good if at night all 10,000 doors were locked. But not all 10,000 doors are equally important. If we can identify which ones are most important and focus our energy on those, we're likely to be improving the overall security of our organization. It's amazing how many organizations haven't thought about what is most important. The second concept is based upon using a process model. That is, we say that everything that goes on in your organization, whether it's mechanical, electronic, computerized, or human, is a process. And every process has some kind of manager, or I call a controller, that makes sure that process is doing its job correctly. So that's a notion of having a controller for every process. But the controller itself is a process. And so, in fact, there is a controller for that controller, et cetera, et cetera. And that leads up to a hierarchy of controls in your organization. What we say is that a cyber attack or accidents take place because of a breakdown in the way in which the control systems operate. I'm going to quickly go through a quick example. This example was called the TJX data breach. TJX may not be familiar to you. It's a parent company of a major retail chain operating in the United States, Canada, and some parts of Europe through companies known as TJ Maxx, Marshalls, Home Goods, and such. This goes back over 10 years ago, but the story is very relevant. Number one, because at the time it was the biggest attack of its kind. 45 million credit card numbers were stolen. But what we like about this attack is that it went to court and there was a tremendous amount of data revealed. One of the big challenges you have with digital forensics in general is often companies are reluctant to reveal a lot of what actually is going on. I often say, what you often see is I call the endpoint. You hear that the back door was unlocked and that's how the burglars got in, but nobody realizes that all the windows were open and the key was under the front mat. So you really want to dig deeper into what's going on in the organization that made this event happen. Now, this diagram is probably much too complex to read or see, and I don't have time to go through in depth, but this is the hierarchical control structure that we developed for that TJX attack. We've done similar ones for Capital One, for Equifax, more recent attacks. I just want to jump way up here to the upper left. You see the state legislature. What in the world does a state legislature have to do with a cyber attack? Well, it turns out the rules and regulations for compliance that are put out place by the government have an important role. And in many cases, they help cybersecurity. And in our studies, they have often hindered cybersecurity. So that's a whole major issue. But I want to focus our attention more at the lower level here at the payment card processing system. That is a controller, if you will, that interacts with other controllers both below it and above it. What we do for each of these controllers, we ask 4 questions. We first say, what is it that controller should be making sure that happens? We want to have the payment card data to be encrypted. There is a thing called the PCI DSS, Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, that all credit card processing should abide by. And also you want to make sure that the systems are well tested and that you make sure you're only holding on to data you need to hold on to. As it turned out in this particular case, TJX was not in compliance at that time with PCI DSS. And there were a number of decisions. These are managerial decisions in principle. Number one was to not fully adopt PCI DSS. I'll come back to that in a minute. Number two, they retained much more data than they needed, and they kept that data much longer than needed. If you don't have the data, it can't be stolen. Why have data that you don't need? Sorry. Okay. Then number 3 and 4, you need to make sure the data is encrypted. So if someone steals the data, they can't make use of it. And finally, it turns out there was interaction between TJX and their credit card processing companies who had raised concerns, but none of them had made a big deal of it. As a result, the corporation was basically asleep at the wheel because not having seen any problems, they assumed everything was fine. This is the kind of analysis we do at each one of the controllers. We say, what should it be doing, and is it in fact doing what it should be doing? Now, Professor Levson at my university is the originator of the safety method we built on. And she has a statement that most major accidents, or in this case, cyber events, are a result of a migration of a system to a higher risk state, often unintentionally. In other words, as we go to something new we haven't done before, we're introducing ourselves into a risky situation. And almost everything involving IT involves new technologies and new. So here are 3 events. Number 1, at the time, TJX was one of the first organizations to adopt Wi-Fi, and they were unaware of all the risks. We've seen this most recently. I'm not sure if you've experienced it. Many organizations have recently adopted Zoom, as we have here. And as you've read the reports, there's all kinds of ways early adopters of Zoom were unaware that they could be penetrated. So whenever new technology is introduced, it almost always opens up new risk. There's a thing we call recall bias, and that is TJX had never suffered a cyber attack in the past, and they naively assume, well, we haven't suffered an attack in the past, we most likely will not suffer an attack in the future. It sounds ridiculous, but I would say the majority of organizations we talk to have that way of thinking. And finally, we call this the confirmation trap, and we've seen this in many of our studies. As I said, much of documents are revealed as part of the criminal actions involved here. This is a screenshot of an email that was sent from the Chief Information Officer to his staff. In summary, what it says is, we realize that we are not PCI DSS compliant, and we probably should be. But we're getting into the busy season for our business. This has been a tough year financially. Don't you all in my staff agree with me that it would be safe for us to wait until next year? Okay. And of course, it's not surprising, all of his staff agreed with him. We've seen the exact same, not the same words, but the exact same phenomenon in the Equifax and Capital One and other break-ins that have taken place. The idea being is often you realize you're at risk, you postpone dealing with that risk, and you run into risk. Finally, what we did is in our analysis, there had been studies done by the Federal Trade Commission and other organizations. This cyber safety analysis allowed us to discover vulnerabilities and things to address that nobody else had unveiled before. So we believe it's a very important method to be used to aiding in the understanding, either be after an attack to realize what is wrong and what has to be fixed in the future, or before attacks to realize what are your vulnerabilities and what needs to be done about them. So I want to end by giving you a following bit of news. In many ways, the worst is yet to come. There are whole new technologies ranging from blockchain to IoT that we've studied that are wonderful technologies, but are opening up whole new areas of penetrations. But it's important for all of us to understand the landscape, because what's at risk is wealth, political stability, property, your physical well-being. If you don't understand these risks exist, you won't be able to take action. Management, all of you have to take the lead in helping our organizations be more secure. Glad to communicate with you afterward at this email address or visit our website. I want to thank you all and look forward to answering some of your questions in the Q&A section. Thank you all for participating.
Introducing one of the MIT's project called Cyber Safety Hierarchical Process Model. And I want to highlight what you put in your slides. The good guys are getting better, the bad guys are getting better faster. Wow, that's cool. I believe it can be a reason why management needs to care about cybersecurity, understand the threat landscape, and address it with the strategy of cybersecurity. So thank you, Professor Matnick, for your presentation. So now we move to our second speaker. We'll meet our second speaker. He is a professor in the Department of Finance at the University of Akron, USA. His research interests focus particularly on the impact of financial system on national culture and institution. He completed his PhD from Kent State University, and now he is active in publishing his research in some numerous journals and media outlets. He is currently editor-in-chief of Elsevier's research in international business and finance, as well as an associate editor for a number of leading finance journals. So without further ado, hi, Professor John Goodell. The time is yours, Prof.
And hopefully we can go full screen on the slides. I'm not sure why it's not responding, but I wanted to talk with you today about the ethics of machine learning. And I seem to have a little trouble advancing my slides here for a second. Here we are. Thank you. So special thanks to everybody, the Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia, and of course UNS Solo, and my great friend Irwan, and everyone guest participants. It's such a pleasure to speak with you today. I'll try and move a little bit quickly. I realize time is important. As I think everybody knows here, financial services, insurance firms, and everything else are growing in their use of artificial intelligence. I think at least half of so many industries now, activities are involving artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence is supported by well-known technologies such as machine learning, which is the focus of some activity that our team's been doing recently. I'm not really here to talk about the specifics of what we're doing and how we're doing it, other than a brief overview, but rather I think what we're doing and some of our results have inspired, I think, some interest on our part in considering the ethics of machine learning. But what are we doing? We've got a paper that's still a bit under construction, and we've been liaising with quite a well-known Manhattan-based financial institution. And we're not actually supposed to say the name of it here today, but it would be an institution everybody would know. And we've been working with the data from them to create a alert model for money laundering. And I'll get into a few more details on that in a moment. But the punchline for us was, even though we used extensive account data, transaction data, even including a proprietary algorithm from the institution itself that they've used for a long time, even when we include all those things, we find that actually the national culture variables, if you're familiar with Hofstede's research, or Hofstede's national culture dimensions, and he's one of the most cited people in the social science index, and his dimensions of a culture have been around since, I don't know, at least 40 years. Well, anyway, the punchline is that national culture alone provided a high degree of predictive power for money laundering alerts. And then when we combined it with all this other extensive data, our predictive ability went way up. And that amazed us a little bit, that just rough national measures could have such a predictive capability. What are the ethics of this, is what I'd like to explore a little bit here. Machine learning and financial economics research, I say causality. I get the impression when I read financial economics research that's more and more incorporating machine learning. I mentioned a couple papers here that even use asset pricing models and have been published in the very top journals. There's not really, to my knowledge, the emphasis on forming hypotheses, and of course testing endogeneity, reverse causality, all these other things that we value so highly. But rather there is sort of, at least up to this point, some are challenging it, sort of, if it works to make a prediction, a factor works, then that's fine. And but there are implications of that. Clearly, machine learning presents a point of departure for both business and research. Issues of profiling are also very much in the public mind, right, in the US. So this strongly adds motivation here. There's been quite a sweeping reaction that I think has received international news to police killings of African Americans in US hands. And for of course, that's the tip of the iceberg. For decades, there's been a use of profiling based on race or demographics and all kinds of issues in the United States. For instance, there are prediction models now that predict probability of recidivism when considering paroling an inmate, and it's found race is sometimes a predictive element. And of course, these inspire a huge ethics debate and need for further investigation. In our money alert model, we were looking at data from 2009 to 18, and we have about over 200,000 alerts. Alert means flags are, raised that cause suspicion and so on. And we have a great deal of data on account age and customer age, net worth, whether IRA, trust, education, whether business or retail, and with a great deal of data on transactions, the amount, the number of recent transfers, all that. And I mentioned also we have the use of a proprietary algorithm that we're not actually able to look inside and see what's in there. And we use, of course, a lot of the standard toolkit there for machine learning and looking at areas under the curve and true positives, false positives, and of course, random forest, support vector machine, gradient boosting, and all that sort of thing. But what we again found was that national factors are surprisingly strong predictors, even amongst all of this stuff. And we feel that given the climate in the U.S. and the emphasis on profiling and all the different contexts, that there is, I think, a need for greater highlighting on ethics concerns about this and considering what would be some of the solutions to this. Because we are quite struck by and didn't anticipate the power of national factors. There's been, of course, papers in recent years that have talked about concerns about the transparency of algorithms and algorithms used for hiring, promotion, loan approvals. Of course, many of these things are life-structuring, life-altering for some people. And how are they established? In all kinds of contexts in our life, including even dynamic pricing models that might be not as life-structuring but irritate people and so on. And then when it comes more specifically to national culture, I won't go into all these papers, but there's been at least 30 years of articles on national culture that associate cultural qualities with ethics qualities. And national culture can be used often in a lot of other ways. For instance, cultural distance is commonly looked at in international business, that when there's greater distance measures, there's less trust, there's going to be more transaction costs to vetting asymmetric information, to create a merger and acquisition or create some contract or something, of course. But there's also over 30 years at least of papers that ascribe certain values to certain cultures that are not necessarily neutral. They might be positive or negative. In finance research, they've papers have published in top journals that suggest individualism quality of Hofstede is associated with overconfidence, and they find financial markets in those countries have more momentum effect, more trending effect, and so on and so forth. And there's a large body of papers that look at what cultural dimensions are associated with different quality of ethical perception and behavior. And then in cultural accounting, of course, there's since 1988, Sid Gray at Sydney's seminal work, there's been association of culture with predilection for transparency, or its opposite, secrecy, and so on and so forth. We even got a little bit carried away with it some years ago. I was working with Raj Agarwal and my wife, who's a professor of education, and we kind of amalgamated some of these papers that associate national culture with different levels of ethics, and came to the conclusion that in countries where people do better on the GMAT tests are also countries that are less ethical. That caused a bit of a stir, and it was I think you could argue different aspects of that. But we find that the cultural quality of individualism is a strong predictor of money laundering alert models. And if you were to take that, of course, to the extreme, since the United States is like amongst the highest ranking countries in the cultural quality of individualism, would we say that major institutions in the U.S. should not have U.S. clients, for instance, or avoid U.S. account holders, for instance? Although the members of my team who are at the Dublin University College Dublin also remind me Ireland actually is rather high in individualism as well. There are a number of aspects that one can look at with this. For instance, are you using national culture, demographic information to deny someone a loan, or are you simply using, okay, or are you using demographic information to have a better prediction? But it becomes a gray area, right? And I would notice this too, that, you know, if you consider the amount of papers in financial economics or just business research in general that have different instruments for culture, there's plenty of papers out there that instrument culture as religion and try and get a county by county, even the US. They look at Catholics versus Protestants and look at capital structure of firms in more Catholic areas and so on. Where could this end? Could you end up with US citizens having a greater or lesser chance of having a loan approved if they live in one county versus another, for instance? But what about a framework for evaluating ethics in machine learning? Firstly, is the entity using ML allowed to use the data? Is machine learning to be used for detection or prediction? This sounds sort of safe on the surface. If you're just detecting something, what's the harm in it versus trying to predict and deny someone parole or deny a loan and so on? But there's a lot of gray areas. For instance, in the US, people drive down the highway and go over the speed limit, almost everybody. But African Americans are seen to be pulled over more often because there's a profiling aspect there that the police might find something more. In the US, there was a highly controversial practice in the US. The IRS was providing closer scrutiny to vocal anti-tax groups to see whether their application for tax-exempt status was valid, and so on. You have microfinance. A fundamental pillar of microfinance is that women are more likely to repay than men. Or scholastic cheating. You want to predict scholastic cheating. One of the research suggests low verbal skills as a predictor. But how would that bias us against immigrant students or foreign students visiting, you know? So there's a tremendous amount of gray area that I think needs much more exploration. Is there a possibility of a transaction cost view, that there's a value to society of having good prediction models, but there's a cost to society of building simple prediction models that may use a very rough measures of national factors and demographic factors? But is there a solution? I know I'm running out of time, so I want to get to the solution. And I think the solution is obvious, that, and we need to take our own medicine with our alert model, is that when you get to the processing speed of many ML procedures, it's very high, right? The old idea that simple solutions are the best because they take a lot less resources may need to be revisited. And maybe we need to look at these algorithms that use very rough measures of demographics, race, ethnicity, national culture, and go beyond what would probably be their misspecifications that come from aggregating demographic and national factors. And maybe as a society, as a global society, maybe the extra cost of doing that is the way to go. And so I will thank you for your attention here and keep the schedule moving. I look forward to your comments and questions in the Q&A session. And let me stop.
Okay, thank you, Professor Goodell. You remind us the importance of to consider the ethics value in providing inputs to machine learning. So thank you so much, Professor Goodell, for the presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, now let's meet our third speaker. He is an academic consultant and lecturer who is interested in economic crime, anti-corruption, UK overseas territories and offshore financial centers, legal and institutional development. He is now a course director of international development, University of Cambridge, UK, and also fellow at Yale University Global Justice Program in USA. He holds his PhD from University of Cambridge. So without further ado, hi, Dr. Dominic Thomas James. The time is yours.
Thank you. Good evening to you all, Mr. Rector, Mr. Chairperson, distinguished speakers and audience members in Indonesia and, of course, around the world. It's a delight to join you this evening and share some remarks and insight on this very important topic of financial crime. And it's in austere times and concerning times, such as those we live in, we all feel perhaps maybe more detached than we otherwise would feel in terms of being able to gather at conferences and symposia. And it's critical, therefore, that those of us tasked with or interested in the regulation and disruption of financial crime are able to come together in forums like this and share our views and insights on shared and respective challenges. From the outset, I just wish to thank the organisers at the Universitas Sebelas Maret and the Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia for the kind invitation to join you today. Ladies and gentlemen, today I wish to focus my remarks on one very important area in the field of financial crime, namely corporate ownership regulation and the increasing transparency of beneficial ownership information in respect of legal entities, in other words, companies. My research interests, as Mr. Chairperson alluded to, do focus on offshore financial centres, including British overseas territories located principally in the Caribbean region and North Atlantic, as well as those Crown dependency region, jurisdictions which have a particularly different relationship with the United Kingdom, and they're located in the Channel Islands and the Irish Sea. These are of particular relevance, these jurisdictions, particularly in recent times, given their development as international financial centres, but also reputational targeting that they have faced in recent times, and indeed how this has meant that they really are amounting to be some of the first jurisdictions in the world to commit to having open, transparent, publicly accessible registers of beneficial ownership. The Panama and Paradise Papers really shone a bright light on the world of incorporation services and indeed raised significant awareness of this topic of offshore business, perhaps an awareness that members of the general public may have had an inclination of, but not necessarily a deep understanding of hitherto. And of course, while the fallout from the data breaches coming out of jurisdictions like Panama, the Bahamas, before that the Bahamas leaks, and indeed Bermuda with the Paradise Papers, while the fallout was perhaps underwhelming in terms of enforcement, the effect of the data breaches really was to create a public register of beneficial ownership, as it were, overnight in respect of companies that were registered offshore. Since then, the transparency campaign in this regard has intensified, although perhaps surprisingly, an international standard on the storing, the gathering, and indeed the exchange of beneficial ownership information remains ill-defined and lacking. This is, of course, in many ways at odds with the broader international anti-money laundering regime, which really presupposes universalism and standardization in terms of laws, principles, and standards that countries must adopt in order to create this risk-based environment and identifying risks and regulating the threats of money laundering. A good example, of course, is the unparalleled success of the Financial Action Task Force, which is really the unparalleled and unchallenged standard bearer on anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing regulation. And of course, their series of recommendations and indeed guidelines, as well as the supplementary monitoring and review processes which underpin those guidelines, really have become universally really the standard bearer upon so many other regulations and standards in the field of financial crime are based. of course, it is really, isn't it, underpinned by this shared challenges, shared responses ethos. And with economic criminality, such as money laundering, knowing no borders, it really is transnational in nature. It's all the more critical